My mother-in-law said my job wasn't important enough to stay employed, so I invited her to my promotion party. The first time Diane Fletcher questioned my career choices, I was elbow-deep in wedding thank you cards. 3 weeks married, and I was still riding the post-honeymoon glow while simultaneously drowning in the administrative aftermath of becoming Mrs. Olivia Fletcher. "You're not seriously going back to work next Monday, are you?" she asked, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against her teacup with aristocratic precision. I looked up, pen still in hand, momentarily confused. "Of course I am. I only took 3 weeks off for the wedding and honeymoon." Diane's lips pursed slightly, the corners turning down in what I'd come to recognize as her signature look of disapproval. It was subtle. Everything about Diane was calculated, but unmistakable. "I just thought you might reconsider your priorities now," she said, stirring another sugar cube into her Earl Grey, though I'd never once seen her actually drink it. "Marriage changes things, especially in families like ours." I bit my tongue. Families like hers, she meant. The Fletchers were old money. Not obscenely wealthy, but comfortable enough that work was considered an option rather than a necessity for the women who married into it. I'd known this about them before saying yes to James's proposal, but somehow I'd convinced myself it wouldn't matter. "My job is important to me," I said simply, returning to my thank you note. "The team at Meridian Consulting is counting on me to return for the Westlake project." "A consulting job," Diane sighed, as if I'd said I collected garbage for a living. "Olivia, darling, those are a dime a dozen. You're a Fletcher now." I gripped my pen tighter but kept my voice even. "I've worked hard to get where I am. And now you can enjoy the fruits of that labor by focusing on building a proper home for James." Her smile was genuine, which somehow made it worse. She truly believed she was helping me. "My son provides well. Women in our circle don't need to work." I had prepared for this conversation even before the engagement. James had warned me about his mother's traditional values, but hearing them directed at me still stung. "I don't work because I need to financially, Diane. I work because I love what I do." She laughed, a tinkling, practiced sound. "Love? It's a job, dear, not a romance. What could possibly be so fulfilling about spreadsheets and PowerPoints?" How could I explain to someone who had never worked a day in her life that I thrived on solving complex problems? That I felt alive when leading strategy sessions with C-suite executives? That the rush of turning around a struggling business division was more exhilarating to me than any luxury vacation? I lead teams that help businesses transform. I tried anyway. Last year, we saved a manufacturing company from bankruptcy. 300 families kept their jobs because of strategies my team implemented. "How nice," Diane said dismissively. "But surely that's someone else's responsibility now. You have a husband to think about." Before I could respond, James walked in, mercifully ending the conversation. He kissed my cheek, then his mother's, oblivious to the tension. "You two getting along?" he asked cheerfully. "Wonderfully," Diane beamed. "I was just giving Olivia some advice on married life." James squeezed my shoulder. "Mom's been married for 35 years. She knows a thing or two." I forced a smile and excused myself to make more coffee. In the kitchen, I breathed deeply, reminding myself that I loved James, that his family, complicated as they were, came with the territory, that Diane meant well, in her own narrow way. But over the next few months, the comments continued. At Sunday dinners, she'd casually mention how James's con's wife had wisely left her marketing career to focus on family. During shopping trips she insisted on, she'd sigh about how my little job must be so stressful for no reason. Each time, I'd deflect, change the subject, or simply smile politely. James noticed nothing. Or if he did, he chose not to see the pattern. "That's just Mom being Mom," he'd say, whenever I brought it up. "She's old-fashioned, but she means well." I tried to believe him. After all, in every other way, my new life was everything I'd hoped for. James was kind, supportive of my ambitions, and genuinely proud of my accomplishments. Our new townhouse was coming together beautifully. We were discussing travel plans, future goals, even tentative timelines for starting a family. But the more I settled into marriage, the more Diane seemed determined to reshape me into her idea of a proper Fletcher wife. The comments became more pointed, less veiled. "Women who prioritize careers over family always end up regretting it," she announced one evening over dinner at their family estate. My friend Caroline's daughter-in-law insisted on keeping her job at that tech company. Now she's 42 with no children and a divorce. Mom, James warned gently, finally sensing my discomfort. What? I'm just making conversation, Diane said innocently. Then, turning directly to me, why do you need to work? My son provides well. Women should stay home. The table fell silent. Even James's father, normally buried in his phone during family dinners, looked up with mild interest. I set down my fork carefully, buying time. A dozen responses flashed through my mind, most of them involving language that would permanently damage my relationship with my mother-in-law. I appreciate your concern, I said finally, meeting her gaze. But my career fulfills me. It's part of who I am. Part of who you were, she corrected smoothly. Before you became a Fletcher. I felt James tense beside me, waiting for my response. This was the moment, the crossroads where I either stood my ground or began the slow surrender to Diane's vision of my life. Being a Fletcher doesn't change who I am, I said quietly but firmly. It adds to it. Diane's smile tightened, but she said nothing more that evening. The battle lines, however, had been drawn. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I had never backed down from a challenge in my life. And I certainly wasn't going to start now. 6 months into our marriage, James surprised me with dinner reservations at Bellini's, an upscale Italian restaurant downtown that required booking weeks in advance. What's the occasion? I asked, slipping into a black cocktail dress. Mom and Dad's anniversary, he said, adjusting his tie in the mirror. 35 years today. My stomach tightened. You didn't mention this was a family dinner. James glanced at me, his brow furrowing. I thought I did. Is that a problem? I forced a smile. No, of course not. Just would have been nice to know. In truth, I had been looking forward to a quiet evening with my husband. The previous week had been brutal at work, client expectations mounting, deadlines shifting, internal drama intensifying. The Westlake merger project was becoming increasingly complex, and I'd spent hours analyzing financial models that refused to align with the client's growth targets. Mom's been planning this for months, James said, checking his watch. She's inviting Edward and Catherine too. Edward was James's older brother, a successful surgeon married to Catherine, who had dutifully quit her nursing career when their first child was born. They now had 3 children under the age of 7, and Catherine's existence seemed to revolve entirely around private school applications and organic baby food. She was, in Diane's not-so-subtle opinion, the perfect daughter-in-law. 2 hours later, we were seated at Bellini's most prominent table. Diane had arranged everything meticulously, from the seating chart to the pre-ordered wine selection. She wore an elegant navy dress with pearls, her silver hair perfectly coiffed. Olivia, she greeted me with an air kiss. You look tired, dear. Is that little consulting job running you ragged? Before I could respond, the waiter arrived with champagne, and Richard Fletcher, James's father, raised his glass in a toast. To 35 years with this incredible woman, he said, smiling at Diane, who gave me 2 brilliant sons and showed me what truly matters in life, family above all else. Everyone clinked glasses. I sipped my champagne, feeling the familiar weight of expectation settling over the table. Speaking of family, Diane said as the appetizers arrived, Catherine has wonderful news. Catherine blushed, touching her still flat stomach. We're expecting again, due in November. The table erupted in congratulations. Edward beamed proudly while James patted his brother's shoulder. I offered my genuine congratulations, though I couldn't help noticing Diane's expectant glance in my direction. 4 grandchildren, she sighed contentedly. Though there's always room for more, isn't there, Olivia? I smiled tightly. We're not quite ready yet. Ready? Diane laughed, cutting into her arugula salad. No one's ever ready. That's what makes it an adventure. We have a timeline, James interjected, squeezing my hand under the table. Probably next year. Diane's expression darkened slightly. Timelines for children? How corporate. She turned to her husband. Richard, did we have a timeline when we started our family? Richard, who had been preoccupied with the wine list, looked up blankly. What's that, dear? Never mind. Diane waved dismissively. The point is, some things shouldn't be scheduled like business meetings. I bit my tongue, reminding myself this was their anniversary celebration. But Diane wasn't finished. Of course, it's harder when both parents are busy with careers, she continued. Catherine, remember how much easier things became after you left that hospital job? Catherine nodded agreeably. It was the right decision for our family. Exactly, Diane said triumphantly. Family decisions, not career decisions. The main courses arrived, osso buco for the men, sea bass for the women. Diane had ordered for everyone without consulting us. Olivia's career is important to her, James said, surprising me with his defense. And she's really good at what she does. I'm sure she is, Diane replied, her voice honeyed with condescension. But priorities change, that's all I'm saying. I took a deep breath. My priorities include both family and career, Diane. I don't see them as mutually exclusive. The table fell uncomfortably silent. Edward cleared his throat and attempted to change the subject to his recent golf game, but Diane was undeterred. Let me be candid, Olivia, she said, setting down her fork. Her voice was louder now, carrying across the table and drawing glances from nearby diners. If you cared about building a real family, you'd quit that little job already. My cheeks burned. James stiffened beside me, but remained silent. I've been speaking with Cousin Margaret, Diane continued, oblivious to the tension. Her real estate office needs an administrative assistant. Something part-time, flexible hours, perfect for a young wife planning a family. Mom, James started, but his voice lacked conviction. I appreciate the thought, I said carefully, but I'm happy where I am. Diane's eyes narrowed. Happy running yourself into the ground? Happy coming home too exhausted for your husband? For a family? That's not fair, I protested, my composure slipping. Life isn't fair, dear. It's about choices. Diane turned to James, her expression hardening. You should put your foot down. A husband has responsibilities too. The silence that followed was deafening. I waited 1 heartbeat, 2, 3, for James to defend me. To defend us. To say anything. But he just stared at his plate, his jaw tight. In that moment, something inside me shifted. The humiliation burned, yes, but beneath it was something colder and more determined. A resolve crystallizing in real time. Catherine broke the silence with a meaningless comment about the dessert menu. Edward chuckled too loudly. Richard refilled his wine glass. And James? He eventually placed his hand over mine. A silent apology I wasn't ready to accept. Later in the car ride home, his explanations tumbled out. Mom was out of line, but it was their anniversary. I didn't want to cause a scene. You know how she gets. I stared out the window at the passing city lights, barely hearing him. My mind was already elsewhere, racing forward, making plans. If no one else would recognize my worth, I would simply have to demonstrate it in terms they couldn't ignore. The morning after the disastrous anniversary dinner, I woke before the alarm. Beside me, James slept soundly, his conscience apparently clearer than mine. I slipped out of bed and dressed in the dark, selecting my sharpest suit and highest heels. By 6:30 a.m., I was already at the office, 2 hours before anyone else would arrive. The silence of the empty building felt like a sanctuary after weeks of battling Diane's expectations. Here, at least, my value wasn't measured by my willingness to surrender ambition. I made myself a coffee and stood by the window, watching the city slowly come alive. The humiliation of last night still burned, but something else burned hotter: determination. Not just to prove Diane wrong, but to remind myself why I'd chosen this path in the first place. My phone buzzed with a text from James. Where are you? I replied simply, work. Early meeting. There was no early meeting, but there would be an all-hands at 9 a.m. where Marcus Bennett, the firm's managing partner, would announce the team for the Granderson merger, the biggest project Meridian Consulting had landed in years. A project so complex and high stakes that most of the senior consultants were actively avoiding involvement. My phone buzzed again. We should talk about last night. I silenced it and slipped it into my drawer. Last night was precisely why I needed today to go perfectly. At 9 a.m. sharp, Marcus stood before the assembled consultants, his expression grave. The Granderson merger isn't just another project, he began. It's a potential game changer for our firm, and a potential career ender for whoever leads it. I straightened in my chair as he outlined the challenge: 2 competing pharmaceutical companies with incompatible cultures, stubborn leadership, and regulatory hurdles that seemed insurmountable. Success would cement Meridian's reputation at the highest level of strategy consulting. Failure would cost us our biggest client and possibly the firm's future. We need someone who isn't afraid of complexity, Marcus continued. Someone with exceptional analytical skills and emotional intelligence. Someone hungry. My hand rose before I had fully processed the risk. Around me, my colleagues shifted uncomfortably, eyes carefully avoiding Marcus's searching gaze. Marcus noticed my raised hand, surprise briefly crossing his face. Olivia, you want to lead this? Yes, I said simply. The room fell silent. I was good at my job. Everyone knew that, but I wasn't the most senior consultant. Taking on Granderson was either career stupidity or a shortcut to partnership. There was no middle ground. See me after, Marcus said, moving on to other announcements. Later, in his office, he studied me with skeptical eyes. This isn't a standard strategy project, Olivia. The drama alone would give our veterans nightmares. I understand the risks. Do you? Because once you're in, there's no graceful exit. You succeed or you burn. I met his gaze steadily. I won't burn. What makes you so confident? He asked, genuinely curious. I thought of Diane's dismissive tone, of James's silence, of the administrative job waiting at Cousin Margaret's real estate office. Because I have more to prove than anyone else on the team. Marcus didn't smile, but something in his expression shifted. The board meets Friday. Convince them you're the right choice. For the next 3 days, I barely left the office. I analyzed 5 years of financial data for both companies, mapped their organizational structures, identified key stakeholders, and crafted a preliminary integration strategy that addressed the core cultural conflicts. By Thursday night, I had created a presentation so thorough that even I was impressed. On Friday, I stood before the board, 6 stern-faced partners and Marcus, and delivered the most important pitch of my career. I didn't just outline the strategy, I anticipated their objections, acknowledged the risks, and demonstrated why my approach would succeed where others had failed. When I finished, the room was silent. Then the oldest partner, Stanley Winters, leaned forward. You understand this will require 18-hour days for the next 6 months, possibly longer? I do. Travel 3, sometimes 4 days a week? I'm prepared for that. He exchanged glances with the others, then nodded. We'll announce on Monday. I walked out feeling lighter than I had in months. In the lobby, I checked my phone to find 6 missed calls from James and a text that read, Mom's invited us to Sunday brunch. Please come. She feels bad about dinner. I doubted that, but typed, I'll be there. What I didn't tell James, what I didn't tell anyone, was about Granderson, about the board's approval, about the path that had suddenly opened before me. The next few months passed in a blur of airports, hotel rooms, and conference calls. I left home before dawn and returned after midnight. Weekends dissolved into marathon strategy sessions and emergency client meetings. James complained, then grew resigned, then finally settled into a pattern of mild concern masked as support. You're working too hard, he'd say, heating up dinner. I was too exhausted to eat. It's temporary, I'd assure him, though we both knew it wasn't entirely true. At Sunday brunches, Diane would ask pointed questions about my little project and whether it was worth sacrificing family time. I'd smile politely and change the subject, never revealing the magnitude of what I was building. The breakthrough came 4 months in during a crisis meeting with Granderson's CEO and his executive team. Their intricate timeline was failing, morale was plummeting, and the board was threatening to scrap the merger entirely. For 6 hours, I guided them through a complete restructuring of the approach, calmly dismantling their objections and building consensus where there had been only conflict. By the end, the CEO was implementing my recommendations verbatim and asking for my direct line for future crises. The next morning, Marcus called me into his office. I braced for criticism. I had overstepped my authority in that meeting. I knew. Instead, he slid a document across his desk. The CEO called me personally, he said. First time in 15 years, a client has praised a consultant by name to the managing partner. I glanced at the paper, a formal invitation to present at the next partners meeting. What exactly am I presenting? I asked, though I suspected the answer. Marcus actually smiled. Your case for partnership, Olivia? The youngest in the firm's history, if you get the votes. I maintained my composure until I reached the safety of the women's restroom. Then I pressed my forehead against the cool mirror and let the tears come. Tears of relief, exhaustion, and vindication. What no one knew, not Marcus, not the board, and certainly not my husband or his family, was that this had never been just about career advancement. It was about claiming my value in a world determined to diminish it. And I was only just getting started. The partner vote was unanimous. On a rainy Tuesday morning, I sat in the oak-paneled boardroom as 8 senior partners welcomed me to their ranks. Marcus handed me a Mont Blanc pen engraved with my name, a firm tradition, while Stanley Winters himself poured the champagne. To our youngest partner, he toasted, genuine respect in his eyes. And the savior of the Granderson merger. The celebration was brief but sincere. Unlike the forced congeniality of family dinners, this validation felt earned, each handshake acknowledging months of sacrifice and excellence. As I packed up my laptop, Marcus lingered. "We're announcing this publicly next Friday," he said. "The firm traditionally hosts a reception for new partners. Nothing elaborate, clients, key team members, industry connections." I nodded, already mentally reviewing my calendar. "Bring your husband, of course," Marcus added. "Family should be there for these moments." Family. The word triggered a cascade of memories. Diane's dismissive comments, James's passivity, Sunday brunches where my career was treated as a temporary distraction from my real purpose in life. Actually, I heard myself say, "I'd like to plan something special for this one. Would the firm allow me to customize the event?" Marcus raised an eyebrow. "What did you have in mind?" "Something more substantial. The Granderson success opens doors to pharmaceutical clients we've never accessed before. This could be both a celebration and a strategic networking opportunity." Marcus considered this. "You're thinking bigger than the usual partners' drinks at the Grayson Club." "Much bigger," I confirmed. "The Crystal Ballroom at the Windsor Hotel. Formal invitations. Key industry players. A proper event." "That's ambitious," Marcus said carefully. "And expensive." "I'll cover the difference beyond the firm's standard budget," I said without hesitation. The partnership came with a substantial signing bonus. Money I had originally earmarked for a vacation with James, a peace offering, after months of neglect. That evening, I arrived home at a reasonable hour for the first time in months. James looked up in surprise when I walked in before 7 p.m., his reading glasses perched on his nose as he graded student papers. In the chaos of my work life, I sometimes forgot he had his own career as a university history professor. Stable, respectable, and utterly unchallenging in his mother's eyes. "You're early," he said, his tone somewhere between pleased and suspicious. I kissed his cheek. "I have news." His expression brightened. "You finished the merger project?" "I did more than finish it," I said, sitting beside him on the couch. "I've been made partner." James blinked, processing this. "Partner? But I thought that was years away." "It was supposed to be. The Granderson success fast-tracked everything." "That's... wow." He removed his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "That's incredible, Olivia. Congratulations." His words were right, but something in his hesitation bothered me. "You don't seem thrilled." "No, I am," he insisted, just surprised. "This means, what exactly? More work? More travel? More everything," I admitted. "More responsibility, more client relationships, but also more control over my schedule. More support staff, more compensation." "Right." He nodded, forcing enthusiasm. "This calls for a celebration. Should I book something at Bellini's?" I took a deep breath. "Actually, the firm is hosting a formal reception next Friday, and I'm planning it." Over the next week, I threw myself into organizing the perfect event with the same intensity I'd applied to the Granderson merger. The Crystal Ballroom was secured, along with the city's most sought-after caterer. I personally selected every detail, from the hand-calligraphed place cards to the string quartet that would play during cocktail hour. Each decision was deliberate, each choice calculated to create an undeniable statement of success. On Wednesday, I visited Dulcet, the overpriced French bakery in Diane's neighborhood that she constantly mentioned in conversations designed to highlight the gap between her refined tastes and my middle-class upbringing. "I need your signature champagne cake," I told the owner. "The one with gold leaf and edible flowers."
"Ah, Madame Fletcher,"
he exclaimed, recognition dawning. Your mother-in-law is one of our most loyal customers. She always says only the best will do for Fletcher gatherings. I smiled tightly. Exactly. Only the best. That evening, I sat at my desk long after James had gone to bed, staring at the cream-colored invitation in front of me. My fingers traced the embossed lettering. Meridian Consulting cordially invites you to celebrate the appointment of Olivia Fletcher to partner. Friday, June 12th at 7 o'clock. The Crystal Ballroom, Windsor Hotel. Black tie requested. I'd addressed invitations to all the senior executives from Granderson, key clients from other accounts, industry leaders I'd met through conferences, and select colleagues from the firm. Only one invitation remained, the one weighted with more significance than all the others combined. At midnight, I finally wrote Diane and Richard's names on the envelope in careful calligraphy. I added James's brother, Edward, and his wife, Catherine, as well, completing the family circle. The next morning, instead of sending it with the others, I hand-delivered the invitation to Diane's doorstep, along with the extravagant cake in its signature pale blue box. The housekeeper answered, surprised to see me on a weekday morning. For Mrs. Fletcher, I said pleasantly. A special invitation, and her favorite cake. Please tell her it's from Olivia. As I drove to work, I imagined Diane's reaction, her initial confusion giving way to curiosity, then perhaps a smug assumption that I was finally embracing her social circle. She would expect some trivial work accomplishment being celebrated with borrowed elegance, a pale imitation of the gatherings she effortlessly hosted. What she wouldn't expect, couldn't possibly anticipate, was just how dramatically the power dynamic was about to shift. For the first time since our wedding, I found myself genuinely looking forward to seeing my mother-in-law's face. The Crystal Ballroom glowed with understated elegance. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm light over tables adorned with white orchids and silver accents. The string quartet played softly in the corner as waitstaff circulated with champagne and canapés. Everything was perfect, sophisticated without being ostentatious, impressive without trying too hard. I stood near the entrance, greeting senior executives and industry leaders with the confidence that had become my armor. In a fitted midnight blue gown that had cost more than my first month's rent, I looked every inch the newly minted partner. James arrived early, handsomer than usual in his tuxedo. He kissed my cheek, his eyes widening as he took in the grandeur of the event. This is not what I expected, he admitted, accepting a glass of champagne from a pasta server. What did you expect? I asked, genuinely curious. I don't know. Office drinks? A dinner at a nice restaurant? He shook his head in amazement. This looks like a wedding reception. It's a significant milestone, I replied. The firm wanted to make a statement. This wasn't entirely true, of course. The firm had been perfectly content with the traditional partners' drinks. This spectacle was my creation, my statement. Did you tell my parents it would be this formal? James asked, suddenly concerned. Mom hates being underdressed. I smiled. The invitation specified black tie. I'm sure your mother knows how to read. James gave me a strange look but was distracted by the arrival of Marcus, who pulled him into conversation about the Granderson merger's impact on the pharmaceutical industry. I excused myself to greet more guests, keeping one eye on the entrance. At precisely 7:30 p.m., fashionably late by Diane's standards, the Fletcher family arrived. Richard entered first, distinguished in his tuxedo. Then, Edward and Catherine, she visibly pregnant in a conservative black maternity gown. And finally, Diane, resplendent in emerald silk and family diamonds, scanning the room with the practiced eye of a society matron, assessing the competition. I watched her cataloging the details. The premium champagne, the live music, the notable guests. Her expression hefted subtly from composed interest to genuine surprise as she recognized several prominent business leaders among the attendees. I approached them with measured steps, embracing each family member with practiced warmth. This is quite an event, Diane said, her tone carefully neutral. The Windsor is impossible to book on short notice. You must have been planning this for some time. Some things are worth planning for, I replied, enjoying the momentary confusion in her eyes. I'm still not entirely clear on what we're celebrating, she continued. James mentioned a work accomplishment. Before I could respond, Marcus appeared at my elbow. Mrs. Fletcher, I'm Marcus Bennett, managing partner at Meridian. I've heard so much about you. He turned to me with a conspirator's smile. The CEO of Granderson just arrived. He's asked to speak with you before the announcements. Excuse me, I said to Diane. Duty calls. I left her standing with James, who had rushed over to greet his family. As I navigated through the crowd, I felt Diane's eyes following me, watching as I stopped to speak with various executives, noting how they leaned in attentively to hear what I had to say. At 8:15 p.m., the music faded and Marcus took his position at the front of the room. The crowd quieted expectantly. Distinguished guests, clients, and colleagues, he began, his voice carrying across the ballroom. Tonight we celebrate not just a professional achievement, but a transformation of our firm's capabilities and future. I positioned myself where I could see the Fletcher family. James stood tall, a proud smile brightening his face. Richard looked politely interested. Edward and Catherine maintained appropriate expressions of familial support. And Diane stood with perfect posture, her champagne glass poised elegantly in manicured fingers, her expression one of benign curiosity. She still didn't understand why she was here, still assumed this elaborate event was somehow peripheral to her family's actual achievements. The Granderson Pharmaceutical merger has been called the most complex corporate integration of the decade. Marcus continued, its success has opened new horizons for our firm, bringing us to the attention of industry leaders who previously considered only the largest global consultancies. Diane's eyebrows rose slightly. She glanced at James, clearly wondering about his connection to this project she'd never heard him mention. This success was the work of an exceptional strategist, Marcus said, his voice warming. Someone who saw possibilities where others saw only obstacles. Someone who worked tirelessly to build consensus where conflict had become entrenched. The room fell silent in anticipation. Diane took a small sip of champagne, her eyes now fixed on Marcus. Ladies and gentlemen, we're proud to welcome our newest and youngest partner, the architect of the grander success and the future of Meridian Consulting's healthcare division, Olivia Fletcher. The lights dimmed briefly, then brightened as a spotlight found me in the crowd. Applause erupted, genuine and enthusiastic. I moved toward the front of the room, accepting congratulations as I passed. When I reached Marcus, he handed me a ceremonial crystal plaque etched with my name and new title. From my vantage point at the front, I could see Diane clearly. Her mouth hung slightly open, the champagne glass frozen halfway to her lips. Beside her, Catherine whispered something in Edward's ear. Richard looked genuinely impressed, and James, my husband's expression was a complex mixture of pride, surprise, and something that looked unsettlingly like discomfort. I delivered a brief, gracious speech thanking the firm, acknowledging key clients, and expressing my vision for the future. Throughout, Diane's eyes never left my face, her expression cycling through disbelief, confusion, and gradual realization. As the formal program concluded, and guests resumed mingling, I was immediately surrounded by well-wishers and potential clients. From the corner of my eye, I saw Diane standing stiffly by the buffet, watching as senior executives and industry leaders waited patiently for a moment of my time. The power dynamic had shifted so dramatically it was almost visible, like watching a well-established tide suddenly and inexplicably reverse its flow. When an elegant older woman approached Diane and asked, "Are you Olivia's mother? You must be so proud," I couldn't help but savor the perfect symmetry of the moment. Diane's world, so carefully constructed around traditional values and established hierarchies, had just tilted on its axis. And I had been the one to tilt it. The reception wound down gradually, like a symphony reaching its final movement. Executives exchanged business cards, clients made tentative plans for follow-up meetings, and the wait staff began discreetly clearing empty glasses. Through it all, I maintained my composure, smiling, networking, accepting congratulations with practiced humility. James found me as I concluded a conversation with the CFO of a major healthcare conglomerate. "You're a hit," he said, his voice tinged with something I couldn't quite identify. Pride? Surprise? Insecurity? Perhaps all three. "It went well," I agreed, scanning the thinning crowd. The Fletcher family remained huddled near the dessert table. Richard looking bored, Edward checking his watch, Catherine resting her feet, and Diane still watching me with an expression I'd never seen on her face before. "Mom's been acting strange all night," James commented, following my gaze. Did something happen between you two? I smiled. Not yet. As the last guest departed and the string quartet packed their instruments, Marcus approached with a final toast. Phenomenal evening, Olivia. The client feedback has been extraordinary. Take tomorrow off. You've earned it. Thank you, but I'll be in for the Westridge meeting at 10, I replied. We've built momentum. I don't want to lose it. Marcus nodded approvingly. That's why you're partner material. He glanced toward the Fletcher family. Your in-laws are still here. Should I have the car service wait? Please, I said. I'll only be a few minutes. As Marcus departed, I approached my husband's family with the confident stride I'd perfected in boardrooms. Shoulders back, chin slightly raised, pace unhurried. Thank you all for coming, I said, including everyone in my gaze but focusing ultimately on Diane. It meant a great deal to have family present. Quite an accomplishment, Richard offered, seeming genuinely impressed. Youngest partner in the firm's history, was it? Yes, I confirmed, though it's the Granderson success that matters more than my age. Well, we should be going, Edward said, helping Catherine to her feet. Congratulations, Olivia. Very impressive. Catherine embraced me awkwardly, her pregnant belly creating distance between us. The children will be so excited to hear about Aunt Olivia's big achievement, she said, though I couldn't recall the last time her children had expressed any interest in my career. As Edward and Catherine headed toward the exit with Richard following, Diane lingered. James looked between us uncertainly. I'll get the coats, he said finally, leaving us alone among the remnants of the celebration. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Diane adjusted her emerald earring, a nervous gesture I'd never witnessed from her before. I had no idea, she said finally.
About?
Any of this. She gestured vaguely around the ballroom. The scale of your work, your position. I maintained a neutral expression. It never seemed to interest you before. Because I didn't understand, she admitted. The words clearly difficult for her. I thought consulting was just making PowerPoints and charging ridiculous fees. Despite myself, I laughed. There is some of that. A ghost of a smile crossed her face. I watched you tonight. With those executives. The way they listen to you. They respect expertise, I said simply. Yes, she smoothed an invisible wrinkle from her silk gown. I've never seen that side of you. The authority, the confidence. It's always been there, I replied. Just not at family dinners. She flinched slightly at this, acknowledging the hit. I made assumptions, she said quietly. Based on outdated values, perhaps. I said nothing, letting the silence draw out between us. After so many months of holding my tongue, of deflecting her criticism, of enduring her dismissal of my choices, the power of simply waiting for her to continue felt extraordinary. When that woman asked if I was your mother, Diane shook her head, ruefully. I felt proud. Isn't that strange? After all my criticism, in that moment, I wanted to claim credit for the remarkable young woman everyone was celebrating. The admission surprised me. In all my planning, in all my imaginings of this moment, I had prepared for Diane's resentment, her grudging acknowledgement, perhaps even her continued dismissal. I hadn't prepared for sincerity. You've never seen my work as valuable, I said, voicing the hurt that had driven me for months. No, she agreed, meeting my eyes directly. I was wrong about that, and about many things, it seems. In the distance, I could see James returning with the coats, hovering uncertainly at the edge of the ballroom. We should go, Diane said, glancing toward her son. Your husband has been patient tonight, watching you shine so brightly. Something in her tone gave me pause. James has always supported my career. Has he? She asked, her eyes knowing. Or has he simply not opposed it? There's a difference, my dear. One I'm only now beginning to understand. Before I could respond, she touched my arm lightly. Thank you for including us tonight, for showing me what I couldn't see before. James approached, draping his mother's wrap around her shoulders. Ready? Yes, she said, her composure returning. But as they turned to leave, she paused, looking back at me standing alone in the emptying ballroom. Olivia, she said, her voice softer than I'd ever heard it. I didn't realize your work meant that much to people. The words hung in the air between us, simple, unadorned, and utterly transformative. I felt the weight of months of resentment begin to lift. I love what I do, I said finally. And I'm glad I never quit. She nodded, something like respect flickering in her eyes. Then she turned and walked away with her son, leaving me in the quiet aftermath of victory. In the months that followed, many things changed. The Granderson success led to more high-profile projects. My partnership brought new challenges and rewards. James and I navigated the shifting dynamics of our marriage with cautious honesty. But the most profound change was with Diane. She never mentioned the little administrative job again. She stopped making pointed comments about Catherine's choices. At family dinners, she began asking thoughtful questions about my work, listening with genuine interest to my answers. The transformation wasn't perfect or complete. Old habits and beliefs don't disappear overnight. But in that moment in the parking lot, something fundamental had shifted between us. I had never needed her approval, but having earned her respect felt like the sweetest victory of all.